There were several further humanoid encounters around the later 1960s that are very much worthy of our time. In the summer of 1966, for example, according to an account in the winter 1999 edition of Flying Saucer Review by Anton Anfilov and Nikolai Kuzmin, in the forest northwest of Topolovka in the Ryogorskaya district, geologist Oleg Ovanovich, along with his team, were on a geological expedition. One particular day, after one of their horses held up in the swamplands of the region, they made the decision to set up camp nearby and rest for the evening. However, after all had turned in for the night, they were awoken by a deafening noise that appeared to be coming straight out of the sky. When Ivanovich ran from his tent to see what was taking place, he was horrified to see the woodland all around them in flames. A moment later, he felt the intense heat of the fire against his body. The geologists had no choice but to take cover in the water of the nearby river to avoid being burned to death. They remained there treading water until the morning, when the flames had died down. All around them they could see the devastation, as if there had been a great explosion somewhere in the middle of the night. It was as they were inspecting their camp area that truly strange things began to unfold. All of the trees, for example, appeared to be bent over in one direction, while many items of equipment, such as their compasses and communication radio, would stop working. Even stranger, all of them began to feel a bizarre sense of powerlessness. They made a decision to investigate the area where the bent-over trees were pointing, which led them to a particularly swampy area. Of more concern, though, was the burnt-out remains of a metallic object, one that had the look of two wash basins set face to face. There were still lights that flashed around the middle section of the crippled craft, and there also appeared to be an open door in the side from which thick smoke poured out. They approached a little further, and then, when they noticed what appeared to be a tentacle-like arm sticking out of the door, they stopped in their tracks. Those who had cameras immediately snapped pictures of the object before they began to be overcome with a deep feeling of nausea and dizziness. They suspected this was likely from some kind of radiation contamination, even more so when all of the photographs they had taken were nothing but blurs. By the time the skies were darkening, and with the sound of the helicopters approaching from the distance, the geologists made their way back to their makeshift campsite. In total, they saw 5 military-style helicopters heading to the area where they had witnessed the downed craft. The following morning, the team returned once more to the swampy area where they had witnessed the burnt-out ruins of the apparent otherworldly craft. However, when they arrived, it was no longer there. All that remained were several sets of human footprints. Unbeknown to the geologists, there had been others who had witnessed the strange events of that evening, and their eventual testimonies would shed at least a little bit of light on what had happened. Anna Igornovna, for example, offered that she had been pulled out of her sleep by a tremendous roar that made the walls of her house shake. When she looked out of the window, she could see everywhere was lit up, as if it was the middle of the day. She would state that it even felt as though the ground was shaking. Then she saw the glowing light that was descending into the forest. The brightness of the object was such that she had trouble seeing properly for some time afterward. The object eventually crashed into the ground somewhere in the woods, sending a large bright flash followed by a powerful blast of wind. Then everything went completely dark once more. As she stared into the distance, she could see a faint glow, as if something was burning. Yet another witness was Michael Kuzmit, who had been fishing in the region when he heard a bizarre, noisy howling sound coming out of the sky. The next thing he realized, the whole sky was glowing brightly, and he could see a wash of flames over him. At this point, he ran to take cover, and several seconds later, a huge explosion sounded out. As he looked around him, he could see the treetops catching fire and felt the heat of the flames from inside the woodland. Might this craft an apparent occupant have been one of the humanoids who have an apparent presence in that part of the world, perhaps in their true form without the ability to alter human perception? It is certainly intriguing speculation. The following year, however, an encounter with 3 humanoid entities is also to be found. According to the Leningrad Commission for Abnormal Phenomenon, in 1967 in Leningrad, a young pregnant mother named Zenaida Volovoj was awakened in the early hours of the morning to a sound of some kind of engine outside her home. When she walked over to the window and peered out, she was shocked to see a yellow glowing object hovering directly over the top of the house opposite hers. Then, without warning and as if sensing her attention, the glowing object headed straight toward her. She immediately backed away from the window and ran to the other side of her bed, ready to take cover. She could hear the object moving directly over the top of her house, and it sounded as if it had done so at a very low altitude. With that, the object appeared to have gone, and bizarre as it was, she did her best to put the incident out of her mind. A week or so later, however, she was once again awakened by the sound of the engines outside her home. What's more, when she went to the window, she could see the same object in the exact same place that she had witnessed it previously. This time, she went to the front door and stepped outside. Bizarrely, and something she was not prepared for, she immediately heard a voice as clear as if someone was standing next to her, although there was no one there, saying, "Look, she has come out," and she escaped before continuing, "We should leave today. We have finished." With that, the spherical object began another approach straight for her, causing her to return inside her home and slam the front door shut. This time, though, instead of passing over the house, it remained directly over the top and hovered. After several moments, she plucked up the courage to return outside. As she stepped into her yard and looked up, she could see the object starting to rise into the sky. Within seconds, it had disappeared from sight. Several nights later, she was awoken again. This time, though, instead of engines, she could hear loud voices. And once more, this cacophony of sound was coming from outside her home. As she had done previously, she crept to the window and looked outside. The sphere was right outside her house, only much lower to the ground than before. So low, in fact, that she could see clearly into it. Through a window or opening, there were two figures speaking. She immediately went to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. Moments later, 3 humanoid figures were approaching, 2 of which were male and the other female. Each wore a tight-fitting overall-type suit. Each was tall, and each was beautiful in a way she couldn't quite put a finger on. She could see the female entity speaking to the others. It appeared as though she wasn't happy, seemingly stating that she should have taken control of the witness before she was able to see them. One of the men then approached the woman, asking her about 2 explosions that had occurred in the region. There had been 2 explosions at mines in months previously. Before the woman stepped in once more, assuring the male figure that she wouldn't know anything about such matters. After all, they, the aliens, only studied humans for their primitive ways. The 3 figures then spoke among themselves once more, before one of the men suggested that they destroy the woman's house, something she stated was not required. She heard one of the men state to the female that he had influenced the witness's brain so that she would become ill and would not remember the episode. With that, the other male figure moved his hand through the air, and with that, she was set hurtling back inside the house and onto her bed. Bizarrely, at the same time, her pillow and blanket covered her face, as if moved by a pair of invisible hands. For a moment she couldn't breathe, but eventually freed herself, and when she did, she could hear a spherical craft was not hovering over the top of her house anymore. Then the woman's voice could be heard, stating that they should search the cellar. With that, several beams of energy pierced the roof of the house, as if they had come from the hovering object and were performing some kind of scan. As the scan progressed, she felt an intense tightening in her stomach. A short time after the object and the aliens disappeared, however, in a tragic twist, the witness would give birth prematurely and the baby died. Not long after that, the woman and her husband moved away from the area and were not heard from again. According to the files of Albert Rosales, another humanoid encounter unfolded in 1969 in Voronov. The witness, Heinrich Ivanovich, was riding his motorcycle along the Kama River when he saw a man on the roadside who raised his hand toward him as if he was waving, thinking he might need help. Ivanovich slowed his motorcycle and approached the man, who he could see was wearing a one-piece, shiny metallic suit. As he did so, however, he noticed a bizarre dish-shaped vehicle behind the man, hovering close to the surface of the ground. He stepped off his bike and walked toward the man, each of them greeting each other in Russian. Ivanovich could see that the man was holding what appeared to be a hose and was seemingly extracting water from the nearby river. The 2 men spoke for several minutes about the craft and even of space and star constellations. Then the man said he must leave and told Ivanovich to step back from the ship so he wouldn't be hurt when it took off into the air. He did as he asked and noticed, he stepped away a little, that the object had a transparent dome on the top. It was through this dome that the humanoid entered the craft. As soon as he was inside, the object began to spin before rising into the air with great speed. Within seconds it had completely disappeared, although there were a few details to exactly what was spoken about and why the humanoid chose to draw attention to himself in the first place. It is another that resonates with many reports from the region of human-like aliens looking to impart information, seemingly for the benefit of humanity. Whatever had visited him in the middle of the night remains unknown. There is another incident that happened a little over a decade earlier that is also of interest to us here. The humanoid in flames at the edge of the woods. According to an account in Ex Libris UFO Russia in July 2003, at around 3 a.m. in the early hours of July 7, 1968, near Hushtortsert, in the Chemensky region of Kabardino-Balkaria Republic, Viktor Petrovich Kostrykin was laying on a haystack enjoying the warm summer night air and looking at the stars in the still dark sky when he noticed what he at first thought was a meteorite falling out of the night sky. Then after a few moments, the light suddenly dimmed somewhat, making him contemplate that what he was watching might not be a meteorite at all. He watched for a few more moments as the object appeared to be coming closer and closer to him, descending in a swirling or spiraling motion. He sat up, now more than intrigued by what was unfolding right before his eyes. The object disappeared over the horizon, and Kostrykin braced himself for an explosion in the distance. However, none came. Only the silence of the night remained. Just what did the witness see in the woods? Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, his attention was drawn to a small area of woodland near where he was sitting. And what's more, he had the distinct feeling that something in the trees was watching him. He slowly began to turn around, sensing that something was behind him. To his shock and horror, standing just in front of the trees was a humanoid figure that appeared to be completely in flames. However, rather than running in a panic to extinguish the flames, they simply stood there completely still, as if oblivious to the flames all around its body. As soon as he saw the figure, the witness jumped from the haystack and ran from the scene as fast as he could. In his mind, he thought that the figure must be a Yeti and that it had been set alight by human hunters somewhere in the woods. What's more, he feared it would be angry and vengeful. As he was running, he suddenly came to a stop. It was a stop that he had no control over, and he realized that he was completely paralyzed. Now unable to move, Kostrykin, attempting to steady his mind and remain alert, he was in no pain, although he could feel his heart pumping heavily in his chest. Just as he was starting to panic at this bizarre sensation, a sense that he was in some kind of suspended animation took over him, and suddenly he felt completely different, relaxed, and with a lightness to him. Then a voice appeared in his mind saying his name. He was able to turn around and saw a huge disc-shaped object that he knew instantly was nothing made on Earth. The disc was glowing brightly, and he could see what looked like several portholes that went around the outside edge, each of which also emitted a bright light. When he got closer to the object, he could see that these portholes were in fact the opening of several tubes, each of which led to the central hub of the otherworldly vehicle. It appeared as though the craft was cocooned in a strange sea of light that looked like some kind of magnetic field, or perhaps a plasma field, as we might recall in the Smirnova case. Although he didn't see exactly where it came from, a humanoid alien entity was standing in front of him. He was wearing a silver coverall type suit that had flames running across it, although they were not at all as they were when they had first seen the humanoid near the woods. Although there were minor differences, the entity appeared human, although slightly taller than the average person. This extraterrestrial would later state that their actual height was somewhere around 20 feet tall, but that their technology allowed humans to perceive them as being of regular human dimension. This is interesting, as several researchers have put forward that alien entities project an image of what they wish the person to see them as opposed to what they are in reality. Taking that a stage further, many ancient creation stories state that human beings must not look at the gods in their true form, and no depictions should be made. After several moments, the entity gestured that he should follow him into the craft, which he duly did. As he stepped onto the craft, he was informed that once inside, here stops all of Earth's powers. We might take from this that the entirely different environment and even realm of existence applies, possibly meaning that time might pass differently within the parameters of the craft. As he walked, he could hear that his footsteps somehow felt muffled. The light was also strange, unlike electric light or daylight, almost soft and everywhere but nowhere. He couldn't, for example, see any bulbs or light strips, which, once more, is a detail that is often found in other accounts from people that have been on board these apparent extraterrestrial vehicles. As he looked around, he could see some kind of control desk against the main wall, with many buttons of different colors and switches on it. There were several other pieces of furniture, all of which seemed to come directly out of the floor or wall, as if they had been stretched and molded from them. Again, this detail of furniture that appears to be fixed to the walls or floor with no seams or joints is another detail that can be found in many other alien abduction cases. Then one of the walls moved, and he found himself looking at a screen or window. On the other side were several more alien beings, each of which had a slightly larger head and eyes than the first, and each of which appeared to be staring straight back at him. At that moment, he had the distinct feeling that they could read every thought in his mind and see into his very soul. As he watched them, he noticed that each of them appeared to wear some kind of tight-fitting skull cap that seemed to be made from a gold or stones. Perhaps bizarrely, as if sensing his curiosity, he was told by his host that these were brain phones that allowed a long-distance communication. Each of them was dressed in a one-piece, tight-fitting suit that appeared to have no buttons or zippers, as if it was a one piece of material that they simply stepped into. He would eventually speak with these entities telepathically, with the witness stating that they not once moved their mouths, and did so in perfect Russian. He was eventually asked to sit in what looked like an old armchair, and was told they were on their way to Mount Elbrus. Within moments of him sitting in the chair, two of the humanoids approached him, one of whom he noticed was wearing a strange black gloves. These gloves were absolutely black in color, blacker than any material he had seen before, and perhaps because of this, the humanoid's fingers appeared to be particularly long. As he sat calmly in the chair, possibly due to some kind of calming agent used without his knowledge, the humanoid reached for his hand and promptly took a sample of skin from in between his thumb and finger, using a tool or device he couldn't quite see. Whatever it was, he didn't feel any pain or discomfort and remained seated. Things, however, were about to take a dramatic turn, one that at first the witness thought would be fatal for him. Without warning, the humanoid reached forward with his gloved hand and closed his fingers around the witness's throat. It seemed as though the hand was reaching deep into his chest and touching his heart. Suddenly he felt a sharp surge of pain and he began to scream out. Seconds later, the hand loosened its grip and was retracted. The witness looked down, fully expecting to see splatters of blood on his chest. There was, however, no sign of any blood or injury. He was informed that he had been cured of a heart condition, one that he had suffered from for some time. Indeed, when he had turned to the spot where he was taken from a short time later, he would ultimately discover that his heart condition had mysteriously cured itself. Why are there so many humanoid encounters from the Soviet Union era? Almost all of the humanoid encounters we have examined here have been non-threatening, if not frightening experiences, and ones that appear to be for the general betterment of humanity. We might also ask why there are so many humanoid encounters in this part of the world, ones where the apparent extraterrestrials are all but human-looking. Perhaps the fact is that it is a vast stretch of land and a massive region. Is there a particular agenda in this part of the world? Might it be suggestive of a permanent presence of these humanoid entities? And what might this agenda be geared toward? As always, and while we should remember to treat these accounts with an appropriate pinch of salt, there are many more questions than answers. We might remind ourselves once more that a great many of these accounts remained largely unknown in the West until the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. We can only guess how many others remain unknown and lost to time. What's more, it would appear when we examine UFO and alien encounters in many of the former Soviet Union territories, as well as modern-day Russia, that these humanoid encounters continue today. Once more, why might that be? Only by continuing to examine reports such as those we have looked at here from the past, as well as encounters from our contemporary era, can we hope to put together a fuller picture both of UFO and alien encounters in Russia and the old Soviet Union regions, as well as the rest of the world.